Anyone else totally choked? I don't know what I'm going to be like next week. I'm just going to put this out there now because I'm already a bit like, okay, so let's just move on swiftly. We're down to 3 readers left in the hat. Give us a drum roll, folks. It is Jack Jordan. Jack Jordan is the international best-selling author of 5 crime thrillers. Woo! Book 6 is on the way. Jack will be reading from his latest thriller, Night by Night. So everyone, please give a huge round of applause to the lovely Jack Jordan.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. So as Vic said, I'm going to be reading from Night by Night. And I'm going to dive right in. Rose reached the centre of town in 40 minutes and followed the cobbled streets until she reached North Lane that would lead her out of the town centre and towards home. She hadn't seen a single person during her walk and had become so accustomed to the silence that the growing patter of footsteps made her stop and turn. Only a few of the street lamps worked down the lane, and those that did flickered pitifully like strobes. Behind her, a man ran beneath one of the beams. The hood of his coat was up, throwing a shadow onto his face. He was tall and broad, dressed head to toe in black or colours deepened by the night. In a split second, he was in the dark with her again. He's a jogger. There's no need to be afraid. But even as she thought the words, her chest tightened, making it difficult to breathe. She turned and continued to walk through the darkness, suddenly aware of every sound. She heard the buzz of a security box outside the shop to her left, the ruffle of her coat, the sound of her trouser legs grazing at her thighs. The man's laboured breaths grew louder, closer, until she froze to the spot with her heart pulse pounding in her ears. There was enough space for him to run around her. It would only be a moment before she was alone again. The force of him threw her to the ground. She had no time to put out her hands and hit the ground with a thud. The side of her face slammed against the cobbles, and instant pain ricocheted through her jaw. She heard the man land with a groan. As he stumbled to his feet, Rose scurried on her hands and knees to the doorway of the nearest shop and rested her back against it, panting in the shadows. Her pulse hammered all over her body, her temples, her neck, her heart seizing in her chest. She tried to find him in the dark. He wasn't looking for her, but back the way he came. She could see his chest heaving, clouds of breath dispelling in the air. He crouched down and swept the ground with his hands, searching for something, his breaths growing more desperate with each second, before he got to his feet and burst into a sprint. His silhouette disappeared into the night. The sound of his footsteps slowly died until she was alone again. Her hands shook before her in fists she didn't remember raising. Her heart was beating so hard that she felt her pulse beating against the door. Had she been mugged? It all happened so quickly. She had dropped her bag. She could taste blood on her tongue. Her head was spinning. Her phone wasn't in her pocket, and the locket was gone from around her neck. She snatched at the skin on her chest for the chain and crawled, her hands running over the cobbles in case it had fallen from her on impact. Her shaking hands touched moss, grime, something sharp. Her bag wasn't far from where she'd fallen, and she slipped the strap over her shoulder to search for her phone on the ground. At last, she grazed the cool screen of the mobile with her thumb. She breathed a sigh of relief and used the screen as a light to search for her locket and any other belongings that might have fallen from her bag. It was just metal, a photo she could have printed again, but tears coated her eyes. Please, don't let it be lost. I can't lose her again. She hovered the light over the dark ground, the beams shaking in her grasp, and caught a glint of gold. She snatched up the locket and pressed it to her lips. The chain was broken, but easily replaced. She slipped it into her pocket and stopped. There was something else on the ground. The light hung over a black notebook, wrapped with an elastic string keeping the covers together. It had belonged to the man. She snatched it up and stumbled to her feet. Hey! The word echoed down the lane and fizzled out into silence again. He was gone.
Short and sweet. Thank you so much for that, Jack. Thank you. Okay, so we're down to 2 names in the hat now. Are you ready? Okay, so drum roll. Can't do everything. I can't do drum roll and get the name. Come on. Welcome, Polly Filliere. Allow me to tell you about Polly. Recently, we had a special last-minute guest. This week, we've just got a surprise one. Polly is filling in for us because we had a very late dropout. So anyway, to plug that gap, please welcome Polly Filliere.
And disappointment spread across the land. Yeah, run a show for 22 weeks and you eventually get to be on it somehow. So I'm going to read the prologue for my work in progress novel, and well, the prologue and the first sentence of the first chapter. As we emerge from the darkness of the Noir warehouse theatre into the bright summer evening, I only have 2 things on my mind. The first is asking Lisa to marry me. The second is telling her that if she says yes, she'll be marrying a murderer. I don't know which is going to be harder. As we sit in the back of the black cab, I see the driver sneaking glances at Lisa in his rear view mirror. I've got used to the reaction from men in the year and a half we've been together. We're heading for a restaurant in Mayfair I had to book 2 months ago to secure a reservation. As we passed through Soho, Lisa asked me what I thought of the play. I make vague comments about the RSC actor's 2-header performance, but I can only shrug when she asks me for my interpretation of the third act meaning. The truth, I'd have struggled with a West End musical, never mind Pinter today. The restaurant is a lesson in pure elegance. Even the chef's name adorning the entrance is discreet, no more highlighted than the small red square with the 2 stars and Michelin logo underneath it. The young woman and man who seat us and provide us with menus respectively are both so good looking they could be models. We spend as much time looking at the customers around us as the list we've been presented with. We read the minimalist menus. Is it a menu if there are no choices to be made? When I booked, they asked about allergies and Lisa's hypersensitivity to oysters, duly noted. We are in the hands of the chef. It's without doubt the most exquisite meal I've ever eaten, and on any other night, I'd have savoured it with the respect it deserves. But not tonight. Because tonight I have to tell Lisa about the murdered girl. I'll tell her about the search party that found me in the woods, standing over the girl's body. I'll explain, if she'll listen and I can find the words, everything that happened afterwards. The court case, the newspapers, the doctors. The night's warm and Lisa is still clutching the signed menu she was given during dessert as we walked the 15 minutes back to our hotel. We walk through the leafy streets of Mayfair, the houses on either side of us straight out of J.M. Barrie stories. The homeless man we almost trip over as we round a corner brings us up short from the surrounding luxury. He sat on a piece of cardboard, one corner of it torn off and propped up in front of him. The words, "Poems read for £5 donation" are written in black marker pen. Even the homeless have a sophistication about them in Mayfair. A battered copy of the collected poems of W.B. Yeats rests in his lap. I hand him a £5 note and tell him he doesn't need to read us a poem. But he insists and he starts to recite. There's no need for the book. The poem's The Stolen Child, a poem I loved as a teenager, but have not been able to read for years. His choosing to read it now seems ominous. He ends the first stanza, his voice gravel Irish, whether naturally for the reading I don't know. For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. As we walk on, we hear him call after us. And yes, he is Irish. You'll have beautiful children. When we reach our hotel, Lisa turns into me and kisses me hard. I can taste what maybe is the sweet Agnes Riesling on her breath. I'm no more a wine aficionado than I am a food gourmet. The sommelier picked the wines to match the menu. This has been the best birthday ever, she says, her hands on either side of my face, the menu making the gesture a little awkward. 30th or not, this must have cost you a fortune. And it has. We're doing well for a couple who've just recently turned 30 and 33, but we're a long way from casually spending the sort of money this weekend has cost me. There's been a lot of saving to pay for the theatre, the meal, and the opulent boutique hotel. The hotel's famous. Ian Fleming used to enjoy martinis in the bar. Martinis the New York Times described as one of the world's best. Still, we tell the concierge holding the door open for us and starting to direct us towards the bar that we'll be heading straight up to our room. He acts accordingly as if it's the wisest decision he's ever heard. Upstairs in our suite, Lisa tells me to open the wine and disappears into the bathroom. She brought it on the train with us this morning, insisting that, regardless of the promised no-expense spared weekend, it's ridiculous to pay hotel markup for bedroom wine. I open the bottle and stand it in an apparently recently delivered ice bucket. I'm impressed the hotel remembered my request and wonder how long it's been there. And then I'm not wondering anything because Lisa emerges from the bathroom and is changed into something less comfortable. She leans in the doorway, a faintly ironic femme fatale pose. As I look at her and feel the desire rising despite myself, I consider saying nothing, leaving all this for another time and place. But that would be cowardly. So I take her hands and I lead her away from the emperor-sized bed she probably thinks we were heading for. And instead I take her across to the bay window where the small table and chairs look out over the hotel's perfectly formed courtyard. I pour us both a glass of wine and I can see from the look on her face she's confused. And does she look hopeful? Maybe I'm projecting. Given how many times I've practiced it, it shouldn't be hard, but it is. In the end, I take a deep breath and tell her everything, starting with my real name and ending with the last of the things that I've kept bottled up inside for these past 12 years. The things I've never told anyone, not the police, the therapists, certainly not the media. And she listens, and although I can't look at her for long as I tell her about the whole terrible mess, I also cannot not look at her from time to time. And as she starts to cry and reach my hand, I see in my mind's eye a glimmer of hope and possibility that she might still say yes. But I know the hardest part's still to come, because after all this is about being honest. And if I'm telling the truth, I have to tell the whole truth. I can feel the small box I placed in my trouser pocket just before I open the wine pushed against my thigh. Lisa, I say, and I hear the hitch in my voice, I love you. I want to marry you, but I need you to know, if you say yes, you'll be marrying a murderer. And there, it's done. She looks at me, and all of the mixed emotions I've seen playing across her face as I've talked for the last 10 minutes are gone, all replaced by confusion. Nick? When did you murder anyone? I look at her, knowing we'll be talking long into the night with my next words. Soon, I tell her. Very soon. Chapter 1. The Murdered Girl. My sister was 18 years and 2 days old when she was murdered. I was 20, drunk and high when it happened. That's my presumption anyway. When I got the call from my parents that Grace had gone missing, I was in my second year at university, and that was how I spent most of my time. And I'll leave it there. Back to you, Vic.
Oh. Thank you so much, Simon. That was brilliant. Some people are calling you the Wizard of Oz. It's not up to me. But thank you very much for stepping in and filling that gap, Polly. So, very early this evening, we are on to one name in the hat. Oh, it doesn't want to come out. There it goes. Okay. Do you know who it is? It's Rhiannon Ward. Rhiannon Ward is the pseudonym of Sarah Ward. She is the author of 4 DC Childs novels set in the Derbyshire Peak District where she lives. Lucky Sarah. Sarah was a 2015 Amazon Rising star. Woo! A Patient Fury was the Observer's Thriller of the Month in 2017 and The Shrouded Path, an Amazon Kindle Top 10 bestseller. Woo! Her new Gothic thriller, The Quickening, written under the name of Rhiannon Ward, is out tomorrow. Publication eve again! Sarah is a board member of Derby Book Festival and membership secretary of the Crime Writers Association. So on publication eve, please welcome Rhiannon Ward.
Hello, Last but not least, I hope tonight, I'm reading from The Quickening, the Gothic thriller that's out tomorrow, and it's set in 1925, and it's set in a house where a famous séance took place in the 1890s, and the chapter I'm going to read is the aftermath of that 1890s séance. As the air cleared, Ada Watkins stifled the urge to cough. She slipped a peppermint into her mouth, its sticky sweetness soothing her throat, raw from speaking in several voices. The smoking candle had been a blessing, its choking fumes thickening the air and compensating for the bright gas lamp the journalist had insisted on placing in the middle of the table. Watching the young newspaper man opposite her, she traced with her fingertips the carved pattern of berries and leaves on the Whitby jet mourning brooch pinned to her chest. It was a design chosen so not to offend any of her clients, although she'd noticed the spoilt madam 2 places to her left staring at it during the séance. The journalist was struggling to finish his transcription. His shorthand was too slow for the speed of her messages, something that he, if not Ada, had failed to anticipate. If there were problems later, she would claim that he hadn't accurately transcribed her words and had been forced to rely on his memory at the end of the session. Through the table light, she could see a sheen of sweat on his face from the hot room. Henry's story would go far in his profession, she was sure. He had the ability, unusual in Ada's experience of men, of being able to do more than one task at any given time. He'd carefully written down her communications from the previous hour, while watching for any movement he might be able to report to his London readers as trickery. The mood in the room was subdued. The great detective writer was the first to stand, patting his evening jacket for his cigar case before slipping off into the night. During the séance, his expression had been both bored and watchful. She'd heard he was a believer, but he too had kept an eye on Ada's hands. She watched him extinguish the smoking candle with his fingertips and disappear through the door which gave onto the terrace. From experience, Ada knew it was best to stay at the table while the guests departed. It prolonged the air of intimacy and ensured there were no embarrassing scenes on the way out. She kept her eyes on the wall opposite, where the pattern of the embossed leather wallpaper danced in the haze, smelling faintly of the stables. Her eyes focused on an image of a small chimpanzee squatting amongst the branches, its expression mocking. At the sound of a choked sob, she turned her head. Helen Clure was being helped from the table by her daughter Lily, who shot Ada a venomous glance as she passed through the door. Their neighbour, Sir Thomas Jensen, hurried after them, his mood dark, leaving her alone with the journalist. Henry had finished his transcription and was gazing at her as he drew a sketch on the back of his notes. She frowned. "That's not going in the newspaper, is it?" "It's just for me. We can use the photograph we printed last year." She watched him for a moment as he filled the paper with thick, violent strokes. "Why are you so angry?" That was contemptible, wasn't it, mentioning the children? "I simply pass on what my spirit guide tells me." "Of course, Mrs. Watkins." Henry slammed the pencil on the table. "If you'll excuse me." Ada rose, smoothing out the creases in her skirt and extracting the pin she'd hidden up her sleeve earlier that day. She bent it back into its usual shape and slipped it into her hair. Picking up her father's pocket watch, she saw she had 20 minutes until the trap arrived, time for some night air before the journey back to London. She passed through the orangery and opened the door, letting in the warm evening air filled with the scent of tobacco and lush roses in full bloom. Her eyes were alert, darting around to find the source of her earlier unease, but all she could hear was the sound of hushed voices talking on the terrace. She crept along the side of the house, unseen by the speakers and spotted, through the light from the storm lantern, Conan Doyle inhaling deeply on his cigar. "You didn't feel inspired to join us, Felix?" Felix Clure leant back against the wall, also smoking, keeping one hand in his pocket and his eyes on the darkening garden. He picked a shard of tobacco from his moustache. "I'm happy to indulge my wife, but I draw the line at taking part in an obvious charade." He took a final puff of his cigar and placed the stub on the ashstand. "Why was Helen crying?" Conan Doyle leant forward and his words were lost to Ada. She waited, unconcerned at the consternation she'd caused. Spirits were an unreliable lot. You never knew what they'd communicate to you, and sometimes you had to embellish a little. Felix jerked back at Conan Doyle's words. I knew this evening would end in folly. You have to keep a clear head about these things, Felix. For every honest medium, there's a fake. Ada Watkins, well, let's just say I didn't see any obvious forms of trickery, but some are better at hiding it than others. Do you think she's even a widow? It's possible, although anyone can wear a black gown. Ada made to leave, infuriated at their tone. Odd though. She stopped and held her breath in the shadows. What was? Asked Felix. I don't suppose it's anything. There was a strange atmosphere this evening. You made the right decision to stay out of there. So he'd felt it too. Brooding, Ada made her way to the front of the house in time to see Sir Thomas snatch his hat from Horrocks' outstretched hand. She could feel the force of the man's displeasure, as could Horrocks, whose nervousness was making him stammer. Leaving so soon, I should mention your departure to Colonel Cluer. Don't bother. Sir Thomas moved off down the drive. I'll call around in the morning to make my apologies. Have had quite enough for this evening. Ada hesitated, watching the man's departing back. Sir Thomas was taking the shortcut through the garden to his neighbouring property. He moved briskly across the lawn, and in the moonlight she could see the man's cane lashing up and down. Horrocks spotted her and moved back in distaste. You'll want your payment. He left her briefly in the hall and returned with a pile of coins which he slid into her hand. She checked to ensure they were all sovereigns. I can hear the trap coming up the drive. Another who was anxious to get rid of her. I need to get my things. She hurried through to the darkening room, opened her reticule and placed the coins along with a small handbell and her father's watch into the black beaded bag. The table was bare, with the exception of the piece of paper left behind by the young reporter. Perhaps he had gifted her the portrait he had drawn of her. It was unlikely to be flattering, but no matter. The public would only see the photograph she had taken in the Soho studio. Curious, Ada reached out, noticing that unlike the dark cream notepaper used by Henry, this leaf was pale blue and lightly scented. Not her portrait then. Ada unfolded the paper and looked at the message. Charlatan. Thank you.
What a way to finish. Thank you for that, Rhiannon / Sarah. And wishing you all the best for tomorrow. Same with all of your other peers who are publishing tomorrow. Okay, folks, so that was number 21. Can you believe it? I've had quite a few messages from people this week. It's been quite tough for many of us this week for one reason and another. So thank you all for joining us. As always, we do have a saying here in the Northeast, and it's keep ahead. It just means keep going, you'll be all right. Go on Twitter to vote for your quote of the week. So there are going to be several rounds of quote of the week, so we'll have to have like a league this week because we've had so many nominations because they were all such fantastic readings. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to those of you who have donated to keep the show on the road. And thank you to our readers tonight: Harriet Tyce, Luke Kuhnes, Rhiannon Ward, Lin Anderson, Jack Jordan, Ian Skewis, Araminta Hall, Kate Reid-Petty, Stuart McLean, and our very own Simon Bewick. Is there anything that dude can't do? Seriously. If you have been and ever present at Virtual Noir at the Bar, drop us an email to that email address sometime this week and just tell us that you've been here every week, because it's good to know. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you to Josh Ritter for the music tonight and Jason Isaacs. And we will be back for our final weekly dose of Virtual Noir at the Bar next week. Thank you very much.